Hello and welcome to Data Conversations over coffee with myself, Craig Stewart. It's a very special session. We're here at CDAO Africa 2020. It's the beginning of the event. It's day one, session one, and joining me is Claire Tolmay from Nestlé. Claire, thanks so much for joining me and helping me kick off the conference.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. So Claire, we met in February, or Jan or Feb this year. Seems a million years ago now, sort of pre-COVID times. And at that point, you were just stepping into your role as a data scientist at Nestlé. And it wasn't necessary that you were coming into a team that was mature and established, but Nestlé is actually pretty early on in their data analytics journey, which we'll get into a bit, but maybe you can just share with people sort of, I guess, your thoughts over the last few months around becoming a data scientist and what this meant for your career.
Well, I think key for me in the change that I've seen, because I have previously been in the medical industry for many years, I think what was absolutely exciting was the fact that we were so early in our journey, and it gave me that opportunity to learn and learn very quickly. You know, there's nothing better than being shoved in the deep end and having to learn. But I think what's really great about it is the support that we've got as I've got as a data scientist from Nestlé, and learning that, and along that learning journey, it's been absolutely amazing in data as a whole and the exploration of data, and especially with regards to, you know, the sphere where I'm very focused on the consumer side, and understanding that and seeing how we can actually improve our consumer experiences across, you know, Nestlé in ESA, as we call it, which is Equatorial and Southern Africa regions. So yeah, it's been absolutely amazing and very, very interesting. Yeah,
it was good stuff. And I see that you're kind of posting a lot on LinkedIn and you kind of attended the conferences. So it's just that continual learning. And I think that's great advice to anybody out there that's just starting out in the role, is try and consume as much information, experience as you can.
Exactly. And I think that is key for me, has been also, you know, pick the brains of the experts. I've been very lucky in the fact that I did actually attend the conference, and I met a lot of the expert brains that have been in this a lot more than me and in the journey a lot more than me. And I've had that opportunity to develop some really key mentor relationships in helping me to understand the sphere, especially with regards to, you know, the more complex aspects like data governance. You know, I think everybody sort of thinks of data governance and wants to fall asleep, but it actually is such a complex field. And it's such a complex journey for any organization to ensure proper data governance throughout the organization. So definitely learn and ask a lot of questions.
Good stuff. And I think that's where people over the next couple of days at this virtual conference will be able to learn and ask questions of people from various industries. We've got people coming from 59 different countries. We've got 3,500 people registered for this event. Speakers coming from Poland, the Czech Republic, Australia, you name it. And I think it's great that we can have this community together to have those conversations. And one thing I'm particularly interested in is Nestlé's journey on this. I mean, I think everybody's familiar with Nestlé, from foods division, obviously chocolate, hot drinks, etc. Very old company. Typically the older companies are sort of laggards in getting to the data analytics journey. But what's kind of spurred this on in the last sort of 18 months, 12 to 18 months at Nestlé?
Well, I think Nestlé has sort of been on this journey already for quite a while already, over the last sort of 6 to 8 years, and exploring various aspects of it. I think in terms of various technologies, there's been a big focus on digitalization as a whole. And, you know, as a secondary to that, data obviously is just part and parcel of that journey. For personalized consumer experiences, it has been there for a while already, but I think we've started to realize the value of data in building that and building those insights that are so important to the business. And that is where the uniqueness has come in over the last sort of 18 to 24 months with Nestlé, really focusing on how can we actually utilize the data that we have, and we have volumes of it. We really do have, you know, literally tons and tons of data out there, but how can we use it better to actually improve both our consumer and our shopper experience? I think that has been the most important focus at the moment.
All right, and the key thing that we want to talk about today is really personalization, and sort of understanding the customer in great detail to offer them a better service, better experience, as you say. And according to McKinsey, done right, personalization enhances customers' lives and increases engagement and loyalty by delivering messages that are tuned to and even anticipate what customers really want. Okay, so really about collecting as much information you can about them, their needs, their wants, their desires, etc. But obviously what what's required there is collecting large amounts of data on the customer from different sources, different departments, then generating the insights. So maybe you can give us a bit of a quick rundown of where you are at in terms of that process of really getting to, I guess, a 360-degree view of your customer, or single view of your customer, however you want to term it.
So I think to the point that I mentioned previously is we were collecting a lot of data already, but not necessarily utilizing it in the right way, and not necessarily integrating it for one single view of a Craig, for instance. So perfect example, especially in the landscape that we're working in Africa. We had a lot of data from offline consumer campaigns, so things that would have happened in store, in retail. And you would have had a little person sitting there and giving out samples and chatting to the consumer and capturing that information, but it wasn't really going anywhere. There was data from those sources. There was data from research, market research that we've been doing. There's data from our online, in terms of our online websites, and from our online experiences in terms of social media experiences with the consumer. But how did these how does this actually link, and how does the consumer have that one single view of the consumer? I think is where we're really trying at the moment to integrate that in a project that I am leading, where we are taking both online and offline, both media as well as other sources, because we live in a very unique landscape. We have things like in South Africa, most people will be like, well, what the heck is a stokvel? But these are things that these experiences where we actually speak to our consumer face to face in the more rural and peri-urban areas, and collect all this data, but we're not utilizing it. So at the moment, key to I think our success in the future is integrating this and getting one single view of a consumer at every touch point that him or her is actually interacting with Nestlé. So I think that is where we're trying to bring together a single platform and view of that. Because it also is going to aggravate the consumer. Just think of yourself as Craig. If you have previously interacted with Nestlé and you've spoken to somebody who's ran a Nescafe campaign in store, you've given them some data there, you may have gone, actually, you're very interested in Nescafe and gone and registered on our Nescafe website, and you actually subscribe to Nescafe in terms of Facebook, and each of those, you're giving us a little bit of data and a little bit of insight into yourself, and we don't actually realize that it's all you. It can be extremely frustrating for the consumer if you ask them, for instance, on a Facebook, something that's been given to them already in a retail store. So that is what we're trying to do overall.
And before I dig into that a bit more, I sort of just remembered back to a story I think you told me when we first met up for coffee, or when I was at the Nestlé offices, that you had found from a vendor point of view, I think it was somewhere in West Africa, that you didn't realize that they were selling loads of this one specific type of chocolate. And when you actually went and did the research, collected the data, you realized that was one of the biggest purchases, but you would never have picked it.
No, we would never have picked it. And I think that is key to us as well, is that shopper behavior. Because, as I said, what's very unique about us is, and that's a perfect example, in West Africa is, a lot of our things are informal trade and informal sector. How do we collect that data, and how do we help our consumer in terms of the products that they're looking for as well, and really help them in getting those products? The end-to-end in terms of the value chain is so impacted by understanding what the consumer wants and what the consumer needs. And unless we actually collect that data and integrate it in a way that we can understand it and do the relevant analysis on that and give it back to the business, we're actually not improving on the consumer journey.
And what are some of the challenges that you're facing at the moment? Is there any sort of new journey, new transformation project? You're kind of at that very early phase of having some really big challenges to overcome. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced, even in the last 12 months, that you're kind of working through, and you feel perhaps you're even on the other side of those?
So I think key to a lot of the technologies that are out there, especially with regards to online technologies and focusing on the online consumer, a lot of these are it sounds very horrible to say this, but very Eurocentric and Americanized. And we do have a different consumer here in terms of how they interact with online resources. So how do we actually, detail that in a different way and utilize that in a different way? And how do we look at different tools? So a perfect example is another tool that we're integrating now is USSD. This is something that when I spoke to my Euro colleagues, most of them don't even know what a USSD is. And when you sort of say to them, well, surely you have somewhere along the line, you've utilized something like on a banking thing where they've given you a little code and you put it in and, there's a menu and they're like, oh, is that USSD? So it's a completely different experience for consumer experience. They're very used to going and Googling something and interacting online. So it's about finding those unique tools and technologies that are going to help us understand our consumer better and collect the data in a way that makes sense for the consumer. I think that's very important in our African concept is our consumers don't have the money for tons of data. Our consumers don't necessarily have access even to a smartphone. How are we going to help them to give the feedback that we need to actually make their experience a lot better? And I think that has been some of the key challenges that we've faced. And
I mentioned at the top of the episode is that at this conference we've got people coming from 59 different countries. Not all those countries are obviously modern, high urbanized population. A lot of it is, rural customers, etc. So maybe there's some advice there around how do you go and get data actually collected in those environments where it's not coming through to you through a mobile app or an internet site or whatever it may be. And I think a lot of people are going to be pretty interested in that sort of data quality and the data collection side of things.
No, and I think that is something that we've really explored in the first sort of 6 months of this year was how can we ensure the data quality? So, I think it really hinges on the type of technology you're using. For instance, with USSD, you have a limitation in terms of number of characters that you can use for any questions you're using. You've got to consider that most people are on feature phones and don't necessarily have the ability to text and type very easily. So how can you give a easier user experience in utilizing some of the technologies? So, for instance, we've made a mandate that most of our consumer data has to be collected via a easy drop-down menu type solution where you can choose a 1 or 2 or 3 or a 4, and that is a lot simpler than having to type out an entire answer. And that also helps us with data quality because we exactly know what you're looking for and controlling. Yes, it has its limitations, but I think we have to sort of balance that. What can the consumer give us and what can we get from the consumer and what does the consumer have that can help us in collecting their data? And so it's a very nefarious balance that you have to consider.
And working across such a massive region, equatorial and southern African regions, how have you gone about, I guess, sort of improving data literacy, the understanding? There's various different cultures that you're working into. How have you gone kind of approach that change management and getting everybody into a customer-centric, data-centric way of thinking in the organization?
So I think we're still very early in the journey with regards to this, and I've been very honest even with one of my mentors is helping me with this because I've said we've got a lot more to go. But I think some of the key elements that we've done is data has become part of our key strategy. It's one of our key priorities. So across the region, everybody's hearing data. They won't necessarily understand it exactly and what the concepts are, but they do know it's a key strategy and a key focus area. So that is one of the key things that we've done is included it as a priority in all of our strategies. Secondly, it's something as simple as everything that is data orientated at the moment. It is a little bit of a difficulty for myself in terms of balancing it, but everything data orientated comes through either myself or my colleague in terms of approval of how you're collecting that data. Will it make sense? These are the things that we want to use. How are we going to actually utilize that? So that has helped us with sort of bringing up that literacy a bit. And I think the third thing that I'm very proud of is we actually have what we call a data steward network, where we have asked particular individuals within the organization, are you interested? Would you like to learn some of these key technologies and skills? And we're upskilling them in simple tools at the moment, Power Automate, Power BI, these simple tools, but something that they can actually make a difference at their level, be it at a factory level or, at an individual business unit level, that is going to show the benefit of data with our mentorship and coaching. So I think that is something that is really helping us. We're building it a little bit more now, and from January onwards, it will be a little bit more complex and encompass certain elements of data governance as well for those individuals. So I think we're still very early in the journey, but I think it's a lot about getting the story out there, We've also included stuff in our newsletters, for instance, that's internal newsletters, getting the story out there, making a part of the priority of the strategy, and finally getting those little advocates that you can have throughout the organization that can help you at the moment.
And I think that'll be a major theme through a lot of the sessions over the next 2 days, is really about how do you make people's jobs not easier, how do you make them more effective, how do they use data to really perform in a far better way. And I think maybe you're kind of lucky in a way that it sounds like people are really enthusiastic about doing that. And I kind of find that across the African continent. I remember sitting here interviewing Simpiwe Pakati from Standard Bank for the DataCon event, and he was just saying the culture and the enthusiasm across Africa is just amazing. It's kind of makes life pretty easy.
No, and I absolutely agree with that. I think it's amazing idea around, I think Africans as a whole is we're a lot more open to new ways of working and new technologies. I think it's because we're not necessarily exposed to it all the time. So it hasn't become that I'm a little sick of hearing this and I'm a little sick of getting exposed to this. It's something new, it's something exciting. And I think they also see the value in it of how can we improve experiences for all of us. It's not just ourselves. We're the advocates for everyone else out there in terms of other, companies and other manufacturers. How can we actually encourage this sort of mindset throughout Africa? And I think that's the experience that I've had as well.
All right, let's move on to the main topic that around personalization, and a lot of people talk about even hyper personalization. Sort of gone are the days that you sort of put customers into a very large group and you kind of just blanket market and hope that some of them sort of understand that and it speaks to what they need. We're really moving into a point where almost understanding each customer. And as the McKinsey sort of quote or description said, it was really even anticipate what they need, sometimes before they even know that they need that. So one of the questions that comes up, I guess, around that is, how do you find the balance between being very valuable to your customer, giving them a great experience, and kind of being a little bit creepy? And especially if you're moving across different, I guess, levels of maturity, education, all those sorts of things. At what point does it kind of become a bit weird? How are you balancing that in this journey?
I think key to our success is always thinking about the consumer, and to your point, where the consumer is in the maturity level. I think at the moment throughout Africa, the consumer is still, if you send something as simple as a mail with your name, this is sort of really seen as cool. This is quite cool. But perhaps if you start, delivering certain things that can be considered as a little bit creepy. I might come on and I've said, I've seen you've been navigating these sites. Would you be interested in this site? Might be considered a little creepy at the moment. It's possible, but it is something that I think it's about that maturity and what the consumer expects. I think consumers as well within Africa are expecting you to give them something that will give them some sort of value at the end of the day, similar to any consumer worldwide, I think. But the value might not necessarily be the same as a more mature market such as Europe, where they've had a lot of personalization experiences over the years already. Where locally it might be something as simple as I said, like a hello Claire on a mail, is something a little bit more. I think from Nestlé perspective, we want to take it to a different level. We want to make consumer experiences a little easier. We want them to be able to have those experiences of being able to save certain favorites, for instance, in a recipe website. I want to save the favorites, so when I come back next time and I'm looking for my chicken recipe that I know I like, there it is, and it's safe for me. So I think it's a delicate balance, but I think we always have to ask ourselves, how would it make me feel? And I always do that. Whenever there is an experience or something that's brought up, or somebody asks me something, I always ask them firstly, if this was you sitting on that other side, either of the computer or in a shop on the other side of that little experience, how would you feel? And I think that is the best indicator. If you're having that little bit of a washing machine feeling in your stomach and going, well, this is a little strange. I think you need to sit and think a little bit more and say, is this really what we should be doing? We all know what works and what doesn't work. And what the gut tells you tends to be 90% of the time right and accurate. And then I think there's also, a lot around the ethics of data, and that we all have to consider. And I think we're still also in a very early journey as data professionals as a whole, really understanding the ethics of data. There's a reason why we have these conversations at conferences such as DataCon and such as CDAO. It's because we're still trying to explore that and figure it out. And then obviously there's the legislative part of it too. How do we protect our consumer and make sure that we don't overdo it? And I think there's a lot of legislation around that in protecting our consumers. So, it's a combination of those three, I think, is very important. So what would you feel, what is the legislation around that, and how do we ultimately protect the consumer at the end of the day? And something that makes sense for them and value rather than being creepy.
Yeah. And what sort of internal structures do you have to manage that? So we talk about ethics in AI. Very often there's an ethics committee or governance committee that those sorts of things have to go through. How are you doing that at Nestlé? Because sometimes that, one person's view on it, and you say, put yourself in the customer's shoes, their experience. As you say, gut feel, you're going to get it right most of the time. But do you have sort of checks and balances and structures in place at Nestlé to make sure that it is not just one person's view of what non-creepy looks like?
Yes. So we do. We've got an amazing support structure in terms of our legal team that also are very focused on data protection and data privacy, and also the ethics. Very similar situation. We also have a global network of data professionals where we get together on a regular basis and discuss some of these things. We have around personalization, we actually have a personalization network of individuals as well, and we have regular get-togethers and have these discussions. So I think we have multiple avenues where, dependent on what you're working on and what element of data you're looking at, there are various aspects and checks and balances for you to have these discussions and to make the decision that makes sense for the business and the consumer at the end of the day.
Yeah. And where to next on the Nestlé data analytics roadmap? I mean, I'm quite familiar. Obviously, we've been working together a little bit behind the scenes on it and got some stuff happening in the new year. But just for everybody watching, what is your sort of next phase? Obviously, personalization, great customer experience. Obviously, that leads to commercial value for the business, which let's not sort of be shy around that. So what next? What comes next after we're really good at personalization? Our upsell, our cross-sell, our customer experience is good, our retention's good. Do you just kind of refine that, or do you have something else on the roadmap that's kind of a big step change?
Well, I think we're still very early in the personalization journey. So at least for Africa, and we definitely working. I think we've done leaps and bounds. Compared to some of our counterparts, we've learned from them. So we're doing in essentially in the last year, we've done a lot what our counterparts have taken 4 to 5 years to do, because we're learning from one another. So I think we are going to move quite quickly. My personal belief and where I really would like to go is more around the behavioral aspects, and how can we help in terms of, to your point, anticipating consumer behaviors and anticipating their needs. So in terms of innovation, how can we actually come up with innovative products that are going to make sense for the consumer, that when they see it on the shelf, they go, well, geez, why didn't I think of this, and immediately buy into it. So I think that is where we will ultimately go, is make sure we understand the consumer, make sure we're giving value to the consumer in terms of personalization, but then how can we take it to the next level in terms of bringing around innovative products and innovative services that make sense to the consumer. So I think that is the next step. Yeah.
And one of the things, just maybe move back a few steps, is around, you've got a relatively small team at the moment, but I know each department kind of has their own insights, etc. How are you bringing everyone together, and how are you kind of looking to expand the data analytics capability within Nestlé to kind of tie all of that together? Because there must be silos, and didn't know that you had that data, and can we stitch it together, this data, bring in product development, etc. How are you kind of looking to centralize that in a way?
So I think we're very lucky in the local environment, because we are under a centralized department that has both our innovation team in there. So, we always getting together with regards to innovation. We've got our e-business, which is our online capabilities. We've got our sales that is very closely related to the team. So I think at the moment we're very good in terms of that. I think to your point, it's where these disparate data sources are things that we still have to really understand. These small little, I think the big data we understand, the big data sources, but it's these small little disparate sources that we still need to really sort of figure out where are they in the business and what are they doing. I think a lot more I'm finding a lot more people coming forward with that type of information now and going, well, we know you're the data people.
Yeah, yeah.
We've got this data. What do you think we can do with it? Or do you think it's even of value anymore? You know, are we spending all this money on it? Is it even of value? Should we actually even be using it? Is there something else that you're working on that we can, you know, alternate with? So I think there is a little bit more, but to be honest with you, I think it's those small little pieces that we really need to work on. And I think that is where the data stewards are going to help us a lot in building that network and getting those eyes within the business, if that makes sense, and the eyes and ears that are able to sort of put up their hand and go, wait a minute, you know, there's something else here that we need to consider that you may be not aware of. I think that's going to be the key to our success.
Yeah, and that actually, one of the things you said, that it kind of strikes me as a marker of success on this implementation of data across the organization, becoming data-centric, is when sort of siloed, smaller departments, whatever, come to you with, I've got this data, what can you do with it? You know, there's that kind of that hunger, the awareness that someone can actually do something with it. Seems to me that that's kind of the point where you start to become quite data-centric.
Exactly. And I think we've been very lucky with that. I think people have, I think what has been the frustration in the business is that they have had this data and haven't really been able to utilize it and figure it out.
Yeah.
And now there's somebody here that can help us, and let's actually try and figure this out together. And I think that's really encouraging as well, because it's not necessarily just, Claire, can you help me? But how can I also use it in a way that will make sense for me as well? So how can you help me to actually utilize this, which is very encouraging.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, maybe by way of summary, you can give us your top 3 tips on starting out, sort of really growing a data analytics capability within the organization, because there's a lot of people that would have registered for this event that are at a very early phase. I mean, I would say the bulk of the market is at that early phase. So we're not asking for, you know, we've been doing this for 30 years, we're totally entrenched in the whole thing, but really kind of that new sort of phase, the real teething problem type things. What are your top 3 tips for people?
So I think top 3 tips, I think first one is definitely get an understanding around data as a priority in the business. So get your senior leadership on board, get that middle management on board in terms of priorities and making it part of their strategies as a whole. Because if it's there on paper and people have to use it as a KPI, they're going to look to see how they can do that. So I think that's very key, and getting that buy-in to actually utilize that. I think secondly, get those people within the business, as I said, that are not necessarily data experts but are interested in data, and get them on board as well. If somebody comes to you, encourage them. Even if it's something small, let them do it, and that will help you to get the message out there. And I think thirdly is figure out your technology stack. Figure it out, because it is so integral, and there is so many opportunities where you can streamline and where you can improve. And that will make a huge difference in terms of the data that becomes available to you that you can actually utilize for those insights.
All right, perfect. Thanks for those. All right, so before I let you go, as is customary on the show, tell us about your relationship with coffee. Now, obviously, you've got access to quite a lot working at Nestle.
Yes,
people out there will be pretty jealous. Tell us a little bit about your sort of relationship and routine with coffee.
Well, I think that's the one thing that Nestle has really taught me about, and I've become a bit of a coffee snob. So, you know, I used to be an instant coffee person, but I absolutely love my decent coffees now. So I think I'm one of those ones that, because Nestle gives me access to all these machines, we've got all the machines at home now, all the opportunity to choose. And I'd like to explore with my coffee, but I'm not one of those people that tends to explore with a strange, funny, sweet things or anything. I like my traditional coffee taste. So, you know, very traditional in my coffee taste, but I don't tend to like I said, a more simple instant coffee, you know, your normal granular coffees, which Nestle offers great stuff. But if I can get the better stuff, why not? Hey, I'm the coffee snob, like I said. So my routine is first thing in the morning before anything else. It's a cup of coffee. Nice. It's absolutely important. And then I am quite terrible in the way that amount of coffee I do drink. But I'm one of those people that has to have a cup of coffee before they go to sleep even. I really have become rather bad in terms of my coffee habit. But luckily I'm not one of those that affects me with my sleep. So it actually calms me. So definitely I love coffee.
Okay. All right. Well, kicking off the show and the conference with someone who's truly into their coffee. Claire, thank you so much for joining me. Great way to kick off the conference, and to everybody out there, enjoy the next 2 days.